we know why, what the sin was, and we know what the punishment was, and it's but here too, I think once we begin to look back, we see that things are not as clear as we remember them to be, or at least as I remember them to be. So we're going to try and do a little bit of hindsight today, and make things messier than perhaps we remember them to be. So let's say a blessing to bring some kedusha, some holiness into our learning this morning. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Okay, so here we go. Sin of the spies. Who knows? Let's just start simple. What was the sin of the spies? That's like it has its own Wikipedia page. The sin of the spies. What was the sin of the spies? What did the spies do wrong? Can someone give us a little bit of a kind of like basic primer on what story we're talking about? Who's willing to? No, you're so good at you're like our rock. You know, always willing to do the heavy lifting for us out front.
Okay, basically, the sin of the spies were sent into the Holy Land of Canaan. There were originally 12 of them. The 10 went in, saw what was happening, saw the people, and saw them as giants in their own eyes. And then they reported that there's no way we can conquer this land. We should just give up now, go back to Egypt or go wherever, but there's no way we'll ever be able to do this. And only Yeshua ben Nun and Caleb believed that they could conquer the land and would be able to settle it.
Okay, so that's correct. But what's the sin? That you gave a correct account of what happened. What was their sin? The sin of the spies is?
They stopped believing.
They stopped believing. Okay. All right. Anyone want to add to this story? I know is right, although the sin, I'm pushing a little bit there because a little bit unclear. Is it a sin not to believe? Is it a sin? What exactly is the sin here? So let's take a look. Let's we can do this. We can do this.
There's
in
a couple of us that have a comment on that, Rabbi.
Yeah, no problem, and I will get right back to you. I just want to give us some of the material that we're going to work with today. So we can do this in kind of. I just want to have more than just Noah's. Very always very helpful and astute summary. I want to have some of the material in front of us, and I think we can do this in kind of 3 quick strokes, 3 moments, right? There are 3 things that happen. God sends the people out, the people come back and give a report, and then there's a consequence. So let's just start with kind of the basic units that construct this disaster. Let's just take a look here, and I'm going to give you a source sheet. All right, let's just take a look here. I just want to give us, just so we're all working with the same material, and then turn back to hear more interpretation. But our Parsha this week it's called Shalach. That means sending out, and that's because that's the first word God uses, send out. So the Eternal spoke to Moses saying, send for yourself men to scout the land of Canaan. Shlach chanashim v'yatur et eretz Canaan, which I'm giving to the Israelite people. Send one man from each of their ancestral tribes, each one a chieftain among them. So Moses sent, oh, this is bad. This is not my latest. What if I just, hold on. No, sorry. I didn't catch all my edits. So Moses sent them out from the wilderness of Paran at the word of the Eternal, all the men being leaders of the Israelites. Okay, so there it is. That's the request. I just want us to have that basic, not even request, demand, command. That I want to have that in front of us. God says, send out these people to scout the land. Okay, so then they go, and these were their names, and then Moses sent them out, and they went and they scout up the land. It tells us a little bit what happens there. And at the end of 40 days, they return. And here's kind of like scene 2. If we're just kind of boil it down to three quick moments that give us the story. This is what they said. They went, they're gone for 40 days, they come back. We came to the land you sent us to. It does indeed flow with milk and honey. Oh, great. So they're picking up on the language that has been used before to describe this land, and indeed flows with milk and honey. And this is its fruit. Brought back some fruit. Some of you know the famous sort of like image of like hauling a massive cluster of grapes. However, the people who inhabit the country are powerful, and the cities are fortified and very large. Moreover, we saw the Anakites there. Amalekites, that's the nation of Amalek, dwells in the Negev region. Hittites, Jebusites, and Amorites inhabit the hill country, and Canaanites dwell by the sea along the Jordan. That's the report. Okay, that's the report. We went, it's a good land, but there are very powerful people there, and the cities are fortified and large, and here are the nations that are there. That's the report. Now, it already seems like it's making people nervous, because here, as Noah also told us, Caleb hushed the people. No, let's go, right? No. Ki yachol nochala. We can go up there. But then they continue, so we'll call this part of the report as well. The men who had gone up with him said, we cannot attack that people, for it is stronger than we are. Okay, we can't go up and attack that people. Ki chazaku mimenu. It's stronger than we are. And then they continue and now things like, well, let's call this the end of the report, but it starts to get very vivid, very vivid and very vicious. The country we traversed is scouted and is one that devours its settlers. Mm-hmm. The country we traversed and scouted is one that devours Eretz Ochelet Yoshveha. It devours its settlers. All the people we saw there are men of great size. We saw the Nephilim there. The Anakites are part of the Nephilim, and we looked like grasshoppers to ourselves. This is the famous last line. We looked like grasshoppers to ourselves, and so we must have looked to them. That's it. That's the report. That's the fullness of the report. You can see that it builds a little bit. Things get added. But we have to wonder what in that report is so bad. Noah says, well, they didn't believe that the land was good, but aren't they? Well, let's just take a look at the consequence, and then we'll open it up for analysis. But okay, sent out, came back, delivered message, and disaster. God, now we'll go to the consequence here. God says eventually, though we're going to have to go back and do a little bit of we're going to have to do back a more thorough survey of this scene. But God eventually says, how much longer shall that wicked community keep muttering against me? Very well, I have heeded the incessant muttering of the Israelites against me. Say to them, as I live, says the Eternal, I will do just as you have urged me. In this very wilderness shall your carcasses drop. All of you who were recorded in your various lists, there have been lots of censuses. From the age of 20 years up, you who have muttered against me, not one of you shall enter the land in which I swore to settle you, save Caleb, son of Yefune, and Joshua, son of Nun. Those are the two that are hushing and supporting the let's go up. Your children who you said would be carried off, these will I will allow to enter. They shall know the land you have rejected. But your carcasses shall drop in this wilderness, while your children roam the wilderness for 40 years, suffering for your faithfulness until the last of your carcasses is down in the wilderness, falls down in the ground. You shall bear your punishment for 40 years, corresponding to the number of days, 40 days, that you scouted the land, a year for each day. Thus you shall know what it means to thwart me. Okay? So that's it. That's the punishment. I, the Eternal, have spoken. Thus I will do to that wicked band that has banded together against me in this very wilderness shall they die to the very last one. Okay? So God wanted this. God sent them out. Please go scout out the land. They come back. They give a report. And then something in that report is so bad that they worshiped a golden calf already, okay? And still we're moving forward. But something happened here that is so bad that they are now, none of them going to go into the land, and they're going to wander the desert for 40 years. Punishment is so severe that we must ask, what exactly was the crime? So, okay, Noah's given us a start here. The crime was they didn't believe that the land would be good. All right. But I mean, come on. Weren't they asked to scout out the land? Right? So what was wrong? They just brought back a report. All right. So sorry for those I put on hold, but now I'm going to turn back to the crowd. And who was it that started to speak before?
Oh, that was Maggie.
Where are you, Maggie? You still around?
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh, okay.
It's, to me, the fact that they came back with this report is kind of like the saying of, "Oh, ye of little faith." You think you don't believe in the power of God because they feel that they're these ants compared to those who are there. So it's like they need to see miracle upon miracle upon miracle, and every miracle that they see hasn't been enough. It's like, what more do they need to see for them to believe that, yes, even though this land is as expressed, the land of milk and honey, and we've got these giant fruits that can feed them all, yet they still don't believe that they can conquer that land.
Okay.
And that to me is the biggest sin.
Okay, great. So this is a good and helpful answer. I'm gonna argue back. I'm gonna try and take these answers and fight with them a little bit, only because I'm confused here. So that's a good answer. They have had all of this experience of God delivering them, helping them, being on their side. So why don't they believe that God is going to help them? Sure. Why do they think they can't do it? Now, again, what I'm feeling troubled by is they were asked to provide a report. They provided a report. But if we follow Maggie's analysis here, then the problem was not the initial report. The problem was not that they said, well, it's, let's go back and just see where the problem begins. We came to the land, the people are powerful, fortified and large. None of this is a problem. I would say that following Maggie's logic, here's where things start to go. This is the sin. We cannot attack that people because they're stronger than we are. Lo nuchala lot. So it wouldn't be that they said things about the land that were not complimentary or that were scary or that were hesitant. It would be that they concluded that they won't be able to do this. And that indicates a lack of faith in God. Okay, so that's a good answer.
Let me take a step further. If you do the screen share again, the very next sentence is what I think their biggest sin was. Not so much we cannot fight them, it's thus they spread calumnies among the Israelites about the land that they scouted, saying. So it's the Lashon Hara.
Good. Okay. And that language is really interesting. You're right. The vayotziu dibat haaretz. They brought out, they sort of encouraged the slander of the land. They encouraged people to speak. They created a kind of critique. So yeah, great. That's great. Thanks, Maggie. All right. So let's keep going a little bit. We got lots of hands up. Richard.
Thank you. First of all, the only other place I've ever seen the word calumny is in Shakespeare in Hamlet's speech, but okay. They were promised the land. They were told from generation after generation after generation, and now all the time in the desert, they were told the land was promised to them. They didn't say it would be handed to them on a platter, but it was promised. They would succeed if they believed the word of God. They came back and say, no, I don't believe the word of God. We can't do this, too hard for us. That's the sin, not believing. They were told it was promised to them.
Okay. Great, and I think that is another vote for Maggie's position, which is that, and really Noah said this from the outset. The problem is a lack of faith. It's not the actual report. It's that they concluded that they could not deliver, they could not go in. When Richard says, all they've heard all along is you will be going into that land, it's God talking, surely that's the truth, right? So why question it? Okay, let's keep going. Elizabeth.
Right. So my question is, who's the real sinner? Wasn't it a sin to send them out to begin with? Like, this land has been promised to us, so why send them out on a mission that makes absolutely no sense, since we already know that's where we're going? So you're asking for a feasibility study on something where we already know the outcome. So I don't know who's really doing the wrong thing. Is it the being sent out, or the coming back with the wrong report?
Great. That's my problem too. Elizabeth and I are struggling with the same thing, which is just, okay, it seems to be that there's some failure of faith here, and we can analyze that and think about it in context, but I just can't get around the fact that God sent them to scout out the land. What did God expect? I mean, is the idea that God sent them to scout out the land and they're just supposed to come back and say, yay, thank you? What's the point of going there to begin with? Okay, so that Elizabeth's struggling with that, and I'm struggling with that as well. Marianka.
So until now, God leads Israelites by the hand. God feeds them. God is, the flame that leads them by night, or the cloud by day. This is the first time where God says, okay, now you go independently, like make the first step. And they fail in that, the way they see themselves as grasshoppers, right? So it links with the lack of faith in God's protection, but they also kind of showed that they're not yet mature enough to be independent of God, if you can say that.
Okay, so then this is the reason for saying, you're answering the question right away, and thank you, Marianka. The reason that God sends them out is to test them, to see, not in a manipulative way, but just really wants to know, are you ready for this? This is your first independent mission. Can you believe? Can you summon the courage? Can you take over the mission? And you know what the mission is, so can you adopt it as your own? No, you got scared too quickly. And I think Marianka is suggesting, and some of the commentators do as well, the problem ends up being that they just weren't ready. Oh, God sees, I guess you're too scared and too weak and maybe for good reason. Let's not, these are people just escaped from slavery. But that's the dynamic that's going on. Okay, great, helpful. Yonatan.
So I actually see this really differently as someone who worked for many years as a scientist. The charge that they got was to bring back a report of fact, not to bring back their opinion. They were told to go gather information. And, if you as a scientist study a certain problem, you can come back and say, this particular lock looks like this, it's this large, and that's fine. You can provide an objective description of it, and a reasonable person may conclude that it's difficult to solve the problem, but it's not your job to go in and say, well, this problem is unsolvable, right? Your job is to describe the facts and allow the decision makers to arrive at the solution. And they're really inhibiting that by coming in and saying, well, this problem's unsolvable. And as a proof text for that, I do want to bring in this word that God charges them with, which is turu, right? Go scout out. We see this word also in the description of the mitzvah for the tzitzis, right? In the which we have in the Shema, right? God says, don't turu after your own hearts and after your own eyes, which lead you wandering, right? Like it seems like there's a warning here to separate those two roles, the role of information gatherer and decision maker.
Yeah. Okay, excellent. And by the way, that that warning that we attach now to the commandment of tzitzit, that's at the end of this week's Parsha, right? So there's a real connection there. Okay, Yonatan's taking us a step further in a particular direction, and I want to follow him there, because here's where we begin to kind of do a little bit of a deeper dive into this scene here. Yonatan suggests that what God asked for was just an objective report, right? God says, just go look at it. Let's just make sure that we see, what did God ask for? God said, send men to scout out the land. That's all God says. Vayatura ta'aretz. And Yonatan says, that means just go and scout it out. Give us a report, an objective report. So then when they start saying things like, we can't, they're stronger than we are, it devours its settlers, there's emotion, there's opinion, there's evaluation there, okay? And that's not what God asked for. God asked for just a report, a survey, right? There's supposed to be, topographical, geographical, military information, but not an evaluation, okay? That's a good way of thinking about what the problem might be. Now let me just make that make that question even more difficult. And here, really, to tell you the truth, this is the main question I have for you today. Okay, this is the thing that I've been struggling with, because if we go back, remember, God sends them out, and Yonatan's exactly right. God just says, go scout out the land. But then God says, go scout out the land. Okay, and then we get the names of the people who went and scouted out the land. But then we have a little bit of a phase 2 of the mission here. Because in verse 17, after they've gathered these men together, Moses sent them to scout out the land. But when he did, he said to them, go up there into the Negev and on into the hill country and see what kind of country it is. Are the people who dwell in it strong or weak? Few or many? And now listen to this language. Is the country in which they dwell good or bad? Uma ha'aretz asher hu yoshev ba, hatovahi imra'ah. Talk about evaluation. Are the towns they live in open or fortified? Is the soil rich or poor? Is it wooded or not? And take pains to bring back some of the fruit of the land. Okay, now.
I still don't think that's evaluation. That is all still, good or bad contains a little bit of an evaluation, but it's not, but there's information that he's asking them to collect.
Yes, but is asking them to evaluate whether the land is good or bad. I'm making a question stronger, I think. That is, God seems to say, just go and look. Just go and look. Just scout it out for us. Moses is okay, you can fit it into God's command, or we can see it as adding or diverging. But let's deal with this now. What is Moses doing? What is Moses? I disagree with you that it's not evaluative. When he says, tell us whether the land is good or bad, that's as stark an evaluation as there could be. But all right, but let's just try and ask the basic question. Why is Moses adding all this information? What is just helpful? What is Moses' objective here? What's Moses trying to do? Okay, so let's enter that into anyone able to speak to that question? Wendy Becker.
So I think that, and it kind of follows with what I was going to say earlier, a few things. I think Moses is saying this in the sense of, here he's been leading these people around, they've been fetching, they've been having a hard time, and this is his chance to say, look, when you go there and you see what God's giving, this is why we've been doing all this. This is why we've been going through all of this. You'll see how good this place is. And please bring back some of that food that's there, because it is so abundant and it is so beautiful. I want you to see, there's a reason I've been doing all this for you. Moses is saying this as his leadership, because this is something that Moses is struggling with constantly. He's been having a hard time evaluating how to be a leader with these people. It's overwhelming for him. And he gets all the tsuras from there. He gets the kvetching. He's getting all of that. So I believe that that's part of it. I sense it.
Wait, can I say, I want to make sure I understand you, Wendy. This is an interesting read, right? We're trying now to read this interlude, this sort of second sending that we're getting from Moses. And I think Wendy is saying that Moses has some investment in a glowing report. God may be saying, just go and scout out the land, but Moses says, and bring a big old grape back, and tell us how good the land. When Moses says, is it good or bad? What Wendy thinks Moses really wants to hear is, come back and tell us how good it is, because that'll be great for here we are journeying, and that'll inspire people, and then people will be excited. Okay, continue, Wendy.
So this whole thing I find very interesting. With Torah, I like to step back and look at this. God sends these people out to see something they have not seen before, to go. And I believe it is a test. First of all, I think it's a test. God is testing us constantly. We're leaving slavery. How are we? Where are we at? Are we going to be able to live on our own and make a new world, make a place for ourselves? And so this is a test to that. Can you make comprehensive decisions with strength, chazak? Okay, so chazak, v'ni chazek. I think this is a big part of it. And it goes back also to, I thought of Abraham. Lech lecha. You shall go out. And God says to Abraham, go. Abraham doesn't know where he's going to be going, but Abraham goes. And I think that this is tied to this, that God is saying now to us as a people, this is who you are, to go into. We don't know what the future holds. And this is an overall lesson for us. We don't know what the future holds, but God is saying, go and be strong. You can go ahead. And when they come back with this fear is the sin.
Okay, but wait, because I think all of that, you're bringing us back to what many of us felt from the outset was the central problem here, which is a lack of faith, a lack of belief, a lack of confidence, a lack of commitment. All of those things, they failed to not to bring a report back, but they failed to believe in the land. But
in themselves.
Here the addition is that Moses set them up for that, right? God gives them a mission which they could come back and just report plainly, but Moses perhaps wants to hear their faith. Moses is the one who wants to hear a positive, an evaluation. Moses wants them to come back and say, not only is the land over there and we can enter in this way and this is like the topography, but it's great and it's going to be good. Moses kind of called for a statement of faith and they couldn't deliver. So I guess what I'm wondering is if that doesn't mean that Moses in some ways is the one who set them up to fail along the axis of faith. Okay. Let's hear from some other folks. Alexandra?
Hi. So I like a lot of the comments and I agree with a lot of them in many ways. I don't necessarily agree that Moses set them up to fail, or I think what I'm looking at this as a parable for how to use like metaphysical principles to create your desired outcome, to enter your own individual promised land. And Moses was telling the people, he said, take great pains to bring back the fruit. Like that was the emphasis. So like, go plan, you have to chart your course, you have to know what you're facing, but make sure what you bring back and what you focus on when you're like creating this and when you're in the planning and executing stages of how to get where you want to go, like bring back the fruit, focus on the fruit. That's what you need to be tasting. That's what you need to be sensing. And I don't know that necessarily need to believe, but I think that what they did is they talked against themselves and against their own power, and which is like reminds me of the way God creates is by saying, let there be light, as a model for how do we create and how, and God wasn't sure because God said afterwards that God saw that it was good. So God didn't have total faith when God was creating that it would be good, but spoke light and spoke, didn't speak
I'm sorry.
against God.
Wait, say that part again. God wasn't sure about what?
When God created the earth and everything, God observed that it was good after it was created, right?
Yeah.
I'm remembering. And so to me, what that means is that God wasn't certain that it was going to turn out good necessarily, that like we can't, but what God did was say, let there be light, and let the light sort of take over. I might not be explaining or expressing this well.
I'm very intrigued by the connection that you're making. I don't know exactly what to where to go with it, but it is true that God's first creation, God creates and then evaluates, right? V'yar Elohim et ha'or ki tov. God saw the light that it was good. That is the first moment where we see evaluation. And it's also true that then human beings very quickly gain the knowledge of good and evil, right? Of evaluation, the ability to say, this is good, this is, so I don't know exactly what to do with that, but I think that's an intriguing connection that you're suggesting there, that there's an evaluative capacity, and it's divine. It's divine. God has it from the start, but God's, your uncertainty about whether God knows this or that, I mean, there's lots of speculation there, but I want to leave that aside. But just the idea that God is able to say, this world is good, this land is good, and knowing that, when one comes to read that Moses is asking the people to go to the land and find out whether it's good or not, that's a big thing to do. That's a big divine thing to do, to say that something is fundamentally good, right? So that's interesting. I want to just, as you mentioned these things, you want to finish, Alexandra?
Just one more thought that I feel really strongly about, that they're not punished, that people are not punished for 40 years, but that it just to wander there for a new generation, a new mindset, because the people were not ready to be their own sovereign beings in their own land, that they needed a new generation to go into the promised land, but it wasn't a punishment.
Okay, that is something, yes. Someone mentioned this before, and we should keep this in mind, that maybe the idea of the 40-year punishment only feels excessive or severe because we think of it as a punishment for so little a crime, or at least so kind of weak a crime. But maybe it's actually just the necessary preparation. God is recognizing that. Although, I don't know, the language is like your carcasses shall drop in the desert. I mean, it feels like punishment. But as Alexandra reminds us of some of the particulars as Alexandra reminds us of some of the particular language that Moses used, and especially the like going and getting the fruit from the land. Let's just reread some of that and remind us of the things that Moses is calling for here, the additions that, because some of this language is interesting and not entirely straightforward, especially that last bit, that take pains, hitchazaktem, right? Make sure that you bring back some of the fruit of the land. Why? Why do you have to do that? Okay. But is the soil rich or poor? Literally like fat or skinny? Is the country in which they dwell good or bad? And also, are the towns they live in open or fortified? Now, this in particular, I wanna just emphasize, because maybe some of you noticed this, but the language here for fortified is mivtsarim, right? Is it in camps, b'machanim, or is it b'mivtsarim, in fortresses? That's like very particular language, but if we go back to the spies report themselves, we actually see that language appear in their report. Bitsurot, the cities are fortified and very large. Varim bitsurot, gedolot, meod. So there's a kind of an echo here of that fortified, of the cities being fortified, that I kind of got to wonder whether the language that they're using for the report is language that they got directly from Moses, right? So what's Moses up to here? I'll just read this one more time, and then I'd like to hear more analysis. But see what kind of country it is. Are the people who dwell in it strong or weak, few or many? Chazak or rafeh, me'at or rav? Is the country in which they dwell good or bad? Are the towns they live in open or fortified? Is the soil rich or poor? Is it wooded or not? And then bring back the fruit. So again, like, what is Moses up to with all of this or that, this or that, this or that, and then get some of bring something back, bring a big piece of fruit back. Okay, so let's keep going. David Kurtz.
Yeah, well, what else could he bring back? Anyway, to me, it really is a test, and in a lot of ways, I think Moses failed it. He's right in there with the tribes. I mean, Numbers is about rejoining the world, and God has taken these people on this journey, and now they're going to go back into the world. They're going to meet idols. They're going to have all kinds of temptations, and these are the tests that he's putting them through. I mean, we had a test last week with Miriam and Aaron. We have this test. We have Korach coming up. We have Pinchas. That's a lot about what Numbers is about. And I think, this God that one of the first commandments, right? You shall not have no other gods before me. This God really wants to make sure that you people better get, and he's showing you punishments, the consequences, everything come if you don't fall in line.
Okay. So God is testing them in other words, right? But Moses, what is Moses doing here? And when you say, David, that Moses failed, Moses was also being tested?
Yeah, he's being tested too. He was being tested last week too. But I feel, yes, he's questioning what's going on. God said, go out and scout it. He didn't say go out and spy it. There's a difference between spying and scouting. And then he told these people, I want to know if it's fortified. I mean, there's a lot of warnings in what's going on there. And that's from Moses. And,
okay, great. Okay, so now I'm beginning to build a little bit of a narrative here. God just says, go out. Moses's language is different, but it is as if David says that Moses feels like that's not good enough. It's not good enough just to go and say. People need more. They need some inspiration. They need some evaluation. They need to see the fruit. They need to see it, or they're not going to be able to go up. They're not going to. Moses is doing something, and I think I understand David to be proposing that Moses is trying to kind of like to shift the mission a little so that it elicits the right response, because he doesn't believe that's enough just to go and see and take the promise of the land just as a given, as a kind of divine mandate. We don't even have to wonder about that. No, Moses is worried that there isn't enough confidence, or maybe Moses doesn't have enough confidence himself. He wants to see the fruit. I want to know, is it a good land or not? This is a very human approach. Well, okay, you're going to gather information, but give us a sense of the place. I would like to know. I haven't been there.
Yeah, right? I think he kind of fails the test a little bit too. And remember what we have coming up. He's going to eventually strike the rock, but before that, we even have Pinchas. So I mean, Moses is kind of a little out on the line here, I think.
Okay, all right. So did Moses do something wrong here? We talk about the sin of the spies, but now we're seeing that the sin of the spies is kind of built on some of the language or the suggestions that Moses has inserted into the mission. So is Moses complicit? Has Moses' agenda filtered down into what becomes the sin of the spies? Payam.
I mean, their sin is they lied. So the first section of the report they give is the truth. And then when they see that the people aren't persuaded, then they start adding falsehoods. Use calumny. That word means a false statement. So when the people aren't persuaded, then they start giving lies about giants being in the land and Nephilim. And to lie to God is the biggest sin you can do, because God is omnipotent. Especially if he's talking about Nephilim running around. I mean, God knows if they're giants or not. So that's the reason he's so angry, is that, you know, it's like they don't have a belief that God knows everything, that you can actually lie in front of this omnipotent being, that you can persuade people to go to the negative side. That's why God's wrath is so strong in this section.
Yeah. Okay, great. Payam reminds us of some of the build here that we haven't been paying attention to so far. And it is really important. So thank you, Payam. I'm going to just show us in the text what Payam is talking about. And it's even, Payam just gave us the first bit of the build, but it gets worse and worse as it goes. And this surely is part of the problem. So let's follow Payam's logic here. The beginning of the report, maybe the beginning of the report's not so bad. We came to the land, it flows with milk and honey. The people are powerful, and here are the people. But then Caleb says, well, stop discouraging the people. We can do it. And then they start to say, no, we can't do it. So it's not just a review of the land, but actually a conclusion. We should not go out. We cannot do this. And then, you know, if that's not enough for you, or if Caleb and Joshua, imagine, are on the side still saying, no, we can, then they go into dibah, this word that Richard pointed out before, calumny, right? Gossip, rumor, slander. And then they start saying that the country devours its settlers and there are giants over there. And Payam is sort of thinking, well, wait a minute, now it's getting like fantasy here. Now you're using hyperbole. Now you're using all this exaggerated, to quote Payam, you're lying. That's not true. So maybe in the beginning, you know, there's a kind of an attempt at neutrality, but it builds into a conclusion, and then it builds into a wild kind of, this is a land of monsters and a land that eats people, right? And I said I want to make it even stronger. The build continues because then everything goes off the rails, because then the people say, and Noah mentioned this at the outside, the people say, oh my God, if only we died in the land of Egypt, or if only we could just die here, that would be better for us. We'd rather just go back to Egypt. Let's go back to Egypt, right? So that's not a part of the official report. That's now the whole people talking, but it builds on a movement that we can see even in the report itself. The report gets worse and worse, scarier and scarier, and then suddenly the people are just, forget it, retreat, go home, no, kill us now, right? And that surely is also part of the problem. I mean, when God says, okay, I'll give you what you want, that's what God means. You seem to be asking to die here in the wilderness, you will, right? So Payam's right that there's a kind of a message that isn't just evaluation, but moves from fact to evaluation to just wild characterization, wild, sort of almost like deceitful or delusional or fantastical description of the land. Okay, Hal and Kathy.
Yeah, I'm just really struck though at, you know, Moses's questions. And so getting back to Moses's questions, because it seems to me that that it's not really totally clear what he's expecting them to say. Okay, so certain of the questions, you figure, what the answers that he wants. He wants to hear that, the fruit is really wonderful, the soil's rich, it's a good place, right? But the thing is that does he want to hear that the people are strong, or that they're many, or that they're fortified? I mean, like, what's the right answer there? Because if it's such a great place, you would expect there to be a lot of people and that they're prospering and they're doing fine. But the thing is that, do you see what I mean?
Yeah, that's right. Some of those questions, there's a very, very, very keen reading, Kathy. And some of those questions, if they're real questions, then what exactly does Moses expect? Moses expects them to come back and say, there's not many people, the land is great, the soil is good, there's no fortresses, everything's fine. Like, what is Moses thinking? I mean, the idea is that they're going to have to go and conquer a whole massive, people. So like, it's not supposed to be easy. It's not supposed to be obvious. It's not supposed to be, there's nothing there on the other side. And what do you make of that, Kathy?
Well, I don't know. It's just, because it doesn't make sense that there would be this wonderful, wonderful land and there wouldn't be people there already.
Yeah.
I mean,
it makes me wonder whether Moses himself is doubting.
Right.
Moses himself is scared. Moses himself he really wants to know, wait a minute, are we talking about fortified cities here? Because that would be quite a lot for this ragtag band of former slaves to confront.
Yeah.
So maybe Moses is also lacking faith here. Maybe Moses is seeding the doubt that eventually gets expressed in the people. I want to, at this point, I want to, with that in mind, we've been wondering for a while now, what exactly is Moses? I'm sort of pushing us to wonder how complicit Moses is in this. I want to now just mention that when there is a kind of review of this story in the book of Deuteronomy, and there's lots of things we can say about that review, but I want to focus on the conclusion that Moshe takes when Moses much later is reviewing this story. Take a look at some of this language here that Moshe uses in Deuteronomy. Moshe says, the Eternal heard your loud complaint and was angry and swore, not one of these men, this evil generation, shall see the good land that I swore to give to your fathers. None except for Caleb, son of Yefuneh, he shall see it, and to him and his descendants I will give the land on which he set foot, because he remained loyal to the Eternal. And then Moses says, because of you, the Eternal was incensed with me too, and said, you shall not enter it either. That's very strange. And in fact, Moses repeats it 4 chapters later. Now the Eternal was angry with me on your account and swore that I should not cross the Jordan and enter the good land that the Eternal your God is assigning as a heritage. Right? So, but especially here, it's like there's the sin of the spies, and because of them, Moses can't enter the land. Now, that doesn't work with the logic of the Torah's narrative. Why? Because we know why Moses wasn't allowed to enter the land. It's a whole other problem. Moses struck the rock, right? God said to speak to a rock to produce water. Moses strikes the rock. That's not what God said. And suddenly Moses is not allowed to go into the land of Egypt. And we could have a very similar conversation there. Like, what is God doing? How could it be that Moses deserved this terrible punishment for such a small crime? But it is interesting. I don't know exactly what to make about Moses. When Moses is reflecting back on his not being allowed to enter the land, he seems to associate it with the episode of the spies. And he says, God was angry at me because of you. So that's worth thinking about. Why would God have been angry at Moses? And what would Moses's role have been in this disaster that would prevent him also from going into the land of Egypt? And of course, we've already been considering some of the answers. Is it that Moses is actually the one who set up this plan for failure? Okay, let's take a couple more questions. Jen?
I'm just so struck by how opposite my experience of this story is, because I am so embarrassed for God. in this story. I really feel like it's a test for God in the story of God learning to understand how to relate to God's creation. Because like, has God ever met a human being before? That's like how I feel when I see this. Like, of course they were scared. These aren't soldiers, right? These are people who are going in and seeing, oh, wow, actually for real, like these are fortress cities. These people really like where they live. How is this going to work? God doesn't do a like, this is how it's going to work. God just says, to heck with you. And I need 40 years to get over how upset I am. And like, I have a little bit of sympathy because when they were like, let's go back to Egypt, it's sort of like, well, I gave you a gift and now you want to give it back. That really hurts my feelings. But like, God needs some conflict resolution skills here. And God is not there yet. And that's kind of how I experience this story.
Love that, Jen. Love that. Thank you. That's such an important comment here as we come to the end of our hour, because we've been thinking about what did the people do wrong? How did they fail? And maybe Moses also failed. And maybe what is the sin? What is the sin? But, you know, Jen asks us to wonder what we would have expected. And what did God expect? God just wanted them to go into this foreign territory, scout out the land, and just say, okay, it's right over there, no problem. You know, there's no reaction, no human response, no emotion, no fear, no. Like, no, just do as God says, do as God says. That's not human. That's not the way human beings are. That's not the way anyone is. Surely there's going to be some evaluation. So, you know, whatever it is that God set them up. God set them up for failure when God said, go over into this entirely new territory and prepare for war there, but feel nothing about it. Just come back and do as I say, right? So yeah, that is an important perspective to keep in mind there. Let's turn to Matt, and let's see, Matt, and then we'll see if we can get another comment or two. Matt Silverstein.
Yeah, through this whole discussion, I felt that we've gotten, here's a little bit, and then someone says, no, that doesn't work, it's something else. We're not going deeper so much as trying to push the problem around. And I kind of feel maybe this is where biblical criticism comes in and says, why is this story here? Why do we even have this? And the only thing I can see is this story exists to say they're staying in the wilderness for 40 years. That it isn't so much anyone did wrong as we need to justify saying that they're there. But that only pushes it around because I don't know why they're spending 40 years, because the book doesn't do much with that 40 years. So feel
that's
like
interesting. You're thinking of it as a narrative device. I guess it's going to be a story about people wandering in the desert. How do we get them to wander into the desert? And that's fine if you want to think of it from like the author's perspective or the editor's perspective.
We can't solve the other.
But it doesn't matter, because even if that's the case, then we have to diagnose, well, okay, but what was the reason given for that 40 years? And your version of it, even to say, well, we need to figure out some way for them to wander in the desert, in some ways parallels an earlier thought, which is that they're not ready to go straight into the land of Israel. And maybe this story, following the sort of literary lens that you're giving us, this story it's there to show us that they are not ready. It's there to God or the author or the editor is trying to draw out for us the way in which, and you think now they just go into Israel? No. That's not, you don't leave a major slave revolt and then wander out in the desert and experience the revelation of God and then just cross over and start living your new life. There's the need for a lot of time here to process everything that's going on, and I think that's fair as a point of narrative, but we still have to solve for the actual problem. I wouldn't be satisfied with, well, and then we just came up with a silly story that allows them to be in the desert for 40 years. So
yeah, I just want to add that I agree that it's not satisfying, but I'm also not satisfied with God leading them for 40 years and thinking they're better prepared. More God telling them where to go. Still that all of these, every one of these just puts me unsatisfied in a different place.
Okay, so let
All
me
of
leave you. Let me leave you on that note. Let me leave you with one last dissatisfaction. Because Matt's right, and I said this from the outset. You know, hindsight is not 20/20, and actually, the more we look back into the past and try and figure it out, the messier it becomes. So, but let me give you one last piece of mess. Let me give you one last unresolved connection. Okay, let me just complicate the picture even further. And the truth is, we were already heading there or thinking about this. I think with Wendy, and when we started to talk about, with Alexander, we started to talk about the fruit that that Moses is asking for, and why Moses wants that fruit. And then Alexander reminded us that the earliest stories we have, the creation story itself, are stories that include evaluation. And as I spent most of my time preparing for this, just thinking about Moses's role in this, Moses's words, the way he set them up. But just at the end, it occurred to me that there's another possible connection here. And I don't know exactly I'm going to leave you dissatisfied here, but it's worth just as a kind of postscript to our messy discussion here, to think about the fact that, in those early stories, there were also people who were taking fruit, right? Moses asked them to ulakachem mipri aretz, take from the fruit of the land. So actually, that very language is in the Adam and Eve story when we read that Eve took from its fruit. She took from its fruit and ate. And what does she get by taking from the fruit and eating? Is the knowledge of good and evil, right? As the snake says, you're not going to die, but God knows that as soon as you eat of it, your eyes will be open. You will be like divine beings who know good and bad, who can say this is good and this is bad, who can evaluate. And that's something that God is a little nervous about. God didn't want us to have the knowledge of good and bad. Maybe God just wanted us to do what God said, as Jen was suggesting. Just, don't worry about the good and the bad of it all, right? But that's not the way we work. When we taste fruit, we have a reaction, right? We have an evaluation, we have a response, right? So that's a lot to throw in at the end. I don't know how to tie together a whole theory of humanity, divinity, and the evaluation of good and bad. But one wonders if there isn't a little bit of that reckoning still going on here in this story, where God wants something very absolute and almost like almost neutral. And Moses, and then the spies, and then the whole people are saying, no. We have a reaction, we have an evaluation, we have an experience of this, and that's too much for God to handle, right? Or that's not the mission. That's not the plan here. So we'll leave it at we'll leave it with that messiness. I think Matt was right that we've sort of been pushing this ball around, but I hope at least we have now a much deeper sense of just how complicated this story is and how many factors contributed to lead to this great disaster. And of course, with that, I hope we keep in mind just how complicated all historical disasters are, and how dangerous it is to seek simple explanations. So we'll see you next week. Thanks everybody for your Torah today. Sorry those I couldn't get to. So many hands up is a good sign. So talk to you later.